Okay, guys, here we are. I think we're live streaming to the audience who just finished watching the excellent documentary, No Visible Trauma. My name is Katie Pearce. I'm the lead programmer for the festival, and I'm here with the co-directors, Marc and Robinder. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. I was hoping you could introduce yourselves and tell the audience a little bit about yourselves and how you came together for this project.
Sure. So, I mean, the backstory is we're both born and raised in Calgary, and we've been friends since we were little guys, I think in grade 4. And for the last many years now, we've been working together producing documentaries. You know, we've done some other films in Calgary about sort of lighter subject matter. But, you know, generally speaking, our work deals with social issue themes of different sorts. This is the first one that's really sort of a deep dive into this type, you know, sort of political, social, you know, government level side of things, and which has been interesting for us. You know, it did not, you know, we didn't set out to make sort of an expose about the police department of our hometown. It was really, it all started for us with Godfred's story, which was just so emblematic of so many of the issues that we see in policing. And one thing led to another, and we felt compelled to take a wider look at the sort of systemic side of things, both in terms of the policing and the broader accountability mechanisms. And that was in you know, mid 2015, we started to think about this project and sort of chipped away at it for some time. And really over the last few years, it's been pretty all-consuming.
Yeah, I would call it a labor of love, but I'm not sure it was, you know, probably a lot of fun filming some portions of this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough subject matter. I think that it's the kind of thing, you know, where, especially because there's so much trust involved in terms of the, you know, the participants in the film, and you know, I think we feel a lot of responsibility to, you know, to tell the stories in a sort of a detailed, as honest, respectful way as possible. So I think that definitely helps keep it going, as the, you know, keeps us going in terms of you know, the ups and downs and the challenges and the roadblocks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Robinder?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Marc was saying, I think over the years, having developed relationships with the people in the film, specifically the victims and their families of police violence, I think we've really appreciated getting to know those folks really well, and to have maintained those relationships throughout, but also to have the film bring their stories and the challenges that they face to, I think, a much bigger audience, and to just give them that sense that somebody has listened to them, and that it's not just a lost cause, or that it's not just meaningless, but that, you know, the people do care about this issue, and that the struggle isn't in vain. Yeah, I think that's been really it's been really great for us to have that feedback from people who are in the film, that, you know, this has been a good experience for them. And yeah, I mean, in general, I think the feedback from the people who were in the film has been excellent, and it's really made us feel a lot better that what we've done is accurate and fair, and you know, on the right side of things. So that's been really a positive thing that's happened for us as we've, you know, undergone this whole festival run and everything else.
Yeah, and for me, the most interesting part of the film, one of many, was that you know, it wasn't just Godfred's story. We were shown stories of white folks who experienced excessive force and police brutality. Addicts, wellness checks, all these things. A ex-female police officer that talked about the sexism and misogyny that she dealt with. So to me, that really drove the point home that it's the whole system is the issue, and it's of course race is a part of the discussion, a large part of it, but I think especially what we're seeing in the media and everything after George Floyd and everything that's gone on in the past year, some of the nuance in this type of a discussion gets lost. And, you know, even what Godfred experienced, like this Starlight Tour, like that's something Indigenous people went through, right? And there's lots of Canadians that might not even be aware of that. So was it intentional to include, you know, varying stories, or did these folks like Anthony Heffernan and his family reach out to you? How did you get connected with all the different people in the film?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. I mean, unfortunately, you know, even just in Calgary, I mean, there's so many different cases that could be looked at. The number of, you know, fatal shootings, of different types of brutality incidents. I mean, there's no shortage, unfortunately. I think, and we considered many different stories. I mean, I think that, you know, obviously folks have just watched the film. So, you know, Godfred was our starting point, and we saw so much of, you know, both the, you know, the problems in terms of policing, but then also in terms of on the prosecutorial side, and in terms of the accountability mechanisms. You know, as we sort of see the reveal in the film, when it becomes clear that this officer has been charged in another incident, and we, you know, like that was something that happened in real time, where we saw that there was a charge, and then found out that it was Constable Trevor Lindsay, the same officer. So for us, like, you know, that connective tissue is obviously so important, just because it's such a clear example of how dysfunctional the system is, that here you have Godfred filing a very serious complaint, in addition to the fact that what had happened to him, again, was, you know, came out in court, and the Crown had seen what had happened, the judge had sort of seen what had happened and raised issues with it. And, you know, there's all these sort of things going on, and regardless, you know, despite the complaint, the formal complaint, you know, Lindsay goes on to abuse somebody else, and, you know, in this other incident was caught on camera. So for us, that was, you know, that was something we couldn't, we had to look at those two cases. And the Heffernan case, you know, part of it, I think, when you're dealing with, yes, it's an issue-based film, but it's also, you know, the narrative side is very important, and the connective tissue between Tom Engel, who really is the lawyer. You know, now there are other lawyers that are, I think, stepping up, but for years now in Alberta, who you know, almost solely has been, you know, willing to sue the police, basically, which can be uncomfortable for a number of reasons. So the fact that he, you know, the connective tissue between him representing the Heffernans in their suit and Godfred, I think, was a natural through line. And there was other, you know, the Clayton Prince incident, which we look at sort of in the opening scene of the film, which is told more through archival, as opposed to, you know, it's sort of, it's a different approach. That was also one that felt for us very, you know, emblematic of a lot of the sort of the cultural side of the problems. And, you know, and there was others, like there's a story of a young Indigenous man, which has some sort of similarities with Godfred, in terms of somebody who themselves very much appears to have been the one who was abused, who was charged with assaulting an officer. You know, that's also another story, which for a variety of reasons, you know, was not included in the film, but may be the subject of a future film by us, depending on what's going on with that family. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I think that part of the challenge for us really was trying to constrain, you know, so much in, you know, 88 minutes is in some sense a lot of time, but it's also, when we're dealing with the kind of nuance and the details of these stories, it's not a lot. Like, there's a number of instances too of women who have been killed, and, you know, we would have, obviously, you know, there's one that's mentioned briefly in the film, but there's, yeah, I don't know. It's sometimes, you know, it's funny, you look back and it can sort of seem, okay, this sort of led to that, but in the moment, I think that's a really challenging thing in terms of writing and you know, editing a film, is figuring out sort of those through lines, and you got to make decisions early on that are really going to affect things, you know, down the line. And it's hard to have all the foresight, but I think we feel, you know, very good about how the film came together, and certainly the feedback has been very strong in terms of the cohesiveness, you know, of the personal narratives, and then also how all the pieces, you know, interweave and work together to speak to the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I guess I was just wondering, like, I can see in the end of the film, you talk about the there's a title card that comes up and shows all the people you guys tried to interview who refused an interview. So what kind of pushback did you receive from certain parties in the Calgary police during the making of the film, and today? Like, is there anything else, like legal battles going on there? Because it's not easy to go against like what just seems to be a big bully, right? The entire system just seems like this big bully monster, and understandably people are afraid to be the he said sort of part of the narrative.
I think, with the police, especially, I think it's not really an easy target for this kind of journalism, partially because there's an opacity where things are opaque and it's hard to get information, and it's very easy for people in power to say no, and we won't talk to you. And in fact, Alberta Justice just totally refused anyone to speak to us on camera, and that's it's a public body, it's working for Albertans, and yet they have this sort of attitude that they're not accountable. So yeah, from the very beginning, it was very challenging to get anyone from the Calgary Police. It was great that new chief Marc Neufeld did eventually, after I think about a year of sort of persistent needling, sit down with us and agree to an interview, which was, I think, definitely the right thing to do, and very glad that he did. But in terms of other entities, we struggled to get people to talk to us on camera, and also to get information and to release files. And that's something that, I think Marc can maybe speak to a little bit more, and I'll let him talk about the legal battles as well. But it's certainly something that we realized is part of the tactic, in terms of, if you're trying to get accountability from police, part of what they're able to do, and especially we saw this with the victims in our film, but it can be a war of attrition, where they're able to, with the resources that they have, really grind you down and delay and delay and delay. And normal people would say, well, I can't keep this up. I have to get on with my life. I have to, move along. Or
I can't afford this.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
And cost becomes a major issue too. Absolutely. And legal bills do pile up very quickly, as we've learned. And that's just one of the many tools that the powers that be, institutions have, is they can, with resources, really grind accountability to a halt. And so on paper, the accountability mechanism exists. Like, you can FOIP, you can file a complaint, but in practice, what happens? Well, Godfred's complaint, 7 years later, remains formally unresolved. That's clearly a broken system. It's not functioning as it should. And that's the kind of thing that we also ran up against while we were trying to make the film, where it was just possible to just delay. Even if you're not giving us a hard no, it would just be possible to say, well, we can't right now, and we're working on it and we're processing. But when you're making a film, you can't always wait forever, and in life, you can't always wait forever. You have to get closure, you have to get justice. And I think that's really one of the hardest things for people who have struggled with these issues at the hands of police, is that it's very hard to get that closure when files take years to process.
Of course. Marc, did you have anything to add to that?
Oh yeah. It's interesting. Like, I think always try to be fair. And I think, if we're honest, on a personal level, interactions with individual members of, the staff, people in different departments at the Calgary Police Service, or folks we're dealing with at the provincial level, trying to get, again, different documents and information. On an individual level, I think that people, I feel very well-intentioned, and some have, I know that some have gone out of their way to try to expedite things and all that. But I think there is a lot of entropy on the sort of institutional level, it's really, there's a lot of, we're dealing with things that are not, pleasant. There's a lot of, there's a lot of quagmire here, and it's hard to, I think, make those changes. And I also think, like, a lot of the issues we're looking at, it's not that they're, you might get little individual snippets of coverage, there's just, in the current age, there's not like there's dozens and dozens of reporters from all the major institutions that are covering these issues. It's like we see, CBC's Megan Grant in the film is one of two full-time reporters that cover the Calgary courts system, but in terms of like bigger investigative pieces, there's just not, there hasn't historically been a lot of this type of work. Now there's a few excellent podcasts in Alberta. You mentioned the Progress Report, Alberta Advantage, that are doing more in-depth kind of independent. Sprawl is another one in Calgary. And, we have some of this in Ontario as well, but so we're kind of in that in between, where we are coming, when we first started approaching the Calgary police, we weren't yet working with the CBC. And, we really were kind of like, I think, given basically a, shoe fly kind of situation. As time goes on, I think we were able to kind of leverage that backing of the CBC to positive end. But yeah, man, there's a lot of problems. I think for us, partly what's so disturbing is, you want to kind of presume, or I don't know, maybe I want to presume, that things are, you look on paper, it's like, okay, this is sort of how you deal with sort of a complaint, or this is the process for, doing a Freedom of Information request, and this is how you appeal it. Like, again, all of these things sort of on paper, it seems like, oh, we have like reasonable sort of systems in place. But how well they function in actuality is a whole other issue. And also, I would say part of what we've experienced is there's just a lot of, for those that don't, we're not lawyers, we don't, you're not, it's not our world. I mean, although increasingly we're sort of in the middle of it, you kind of presume it's like, oh, there must be things maybe really like well codified, but at the end of the day, there's just a lot of discretion at every level all the time. And that discretion, I think, can go different ways for different people. And, you sort of alluded to just kind of like this, just the layers and the levels of problems like, that we're dealing with here. And, it's like poor Godfred. I mean, it's just, it's like one, wrong place at the wrong time, maybe the wrong color skin, like whatever the factors are, said something that was interpreted as, lippy or whatever. And it's just like the snowball effect. And it's just, I think it's, it's really scary how, things can spiral out of control. You'd mentioned the lawsuit. So, we have to be a bit careful with how we talk about these things, but we are being sued by, viewers may remember, early in the film, in the Clayton Prince incident, there's an officer who actually isn't named in the film. He's the one who's, instructing the trainee he's the one who pulled his gun on Clayton Prince and, told him to get down on the ground. And then sort of afterwards is talking about cheap shots and, kind of this sort of street justice side of things quite candidly, clearly identified the issues. But, so there's an issue to do with the transcription of a word did versus should, and he thinks it's one thing and we think it's the other. And it's sort of a very minor thing has now, spiraled into a lawsuit that's, seeking $350,000 plus in damages from us. In addition to sort of claims that, we've miscontextualized it and, been malicious in this, all of which, of course, we believe couldn't be further from the truth. And, we stand by our work and we'll defend it vigorously in court as needed. But it's interesting because, the lawyers representing this officer, this is one of the highest paid civil litigants in the province. And, we don't know 100%, but we can be fairly confident that those legal fees, until it's demonstrated otherwise, are being paid for by the Calgary Police Association, which is the union, so that's a lot of resources. We don't have those resources. We do have, insurance. And so far, fingers crossed, like after a $10,000 deductible, I think hopefully we should be good. But anyways, all of which is to say it's a lot, and it is, intimidating for us to be in this position, especially when we've made such an effort to be, judicious and fair in our work. But I guess, it is what it is. And it's, we'll see. I think our general sense is, we thought we were making a, one movie here and maybe that's it for us, but there's just so many issues. And like, I don't know. It's like, I think we both sort of feel this kind of responsibility to try to, like we have so many people since the film came out that have written to us that said, I've had this horrible experience. We've had different, incidents that have been ongoing that we've tried to sort of shed light on through social media. And for those that are interested, Above the Law doc on Facebook or Instagram and Lost Time Media on Twitter, you know, we've tried to make this more than just like a promotional tool for the film, but really more of a place where we can sort of contribute to the broader you know, discussion and documentation of these issues, policing issues, not just in Calgary, but, you know, but across the country and beyond. So, yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah,
Sometimes,
it's great though. Like I think that's, you know, the first step, and obviously, unfortunately, what will have to be years of reform. I'm sad that, you know, these types of films still need to be made, and that these discussions still need to be had after this like decades of, you know, like the same sort of stuff. And we can think of Rodney King, and like the list goes on in North America, not just the States. And yeah, I guess for me, like another very illuminating part, I wrote it down, is when I think it's Godfred's defense lawyer. She said, you know, Godfred, is intended to feel fortunate that he's been found not guilty and move on, right? And that is just like crazy to me, right? And that is how broken the system is. I mean, he shouldn't have even been charged in the first place. And there's just so many stories like that. And I was looking at your guys' Twitter, and there's tons of comments on the YouTube video as well, which is, you know, it's sad that there's so many comments there, but that also kind of gives you hope that people are at least having the discussion, feeling comfortable to take those risks. Obviously, people suing you and doing these sorts of things, it just only adds to my feeling that it's bully tactics. But I do think it's great at the end of the film, you guys were able to get Neufeld, and he says the most interesting thing to me in the whole film. He's talking about like the, you know, bad apples or the barrel, right? And I think that's the main issue. Like how do we, you know, resolve this system? It is, to me, all about the barrel being toxic and not a few bad apples. And I think people, when we talk about these issues, get so overwhelmed that they just don't do anything about it because it's just a monster. So where do you guys think the average citizen could start to do something about these issues?
I think it's really important that people are informed, and that they, you know, as much as possible understand what the issues are in terms of accountability in Canada. And also just that, I think, stepping back for a quick second, just that so much of what we're dealing with is a reality. The reality is what we will tolerate. And what we've tolerated in Canada over the last however many years is basically a militarization of police, where every officer has a firearm. And it's somehow become, in the news media, even sometimes there's coverage where it's just like, oh yeah, well, this person was killed even though they didn't have a weapon. And it's just like, yeah, okay, well, they, you know, somebody was using drugs or something. That's just how it goes sometimes. Well, that's not acceptable. And I think that's part of it, is this, that everyone in Canada should find that unacceptable as a reality, that the taking of a life, that, you know, the use of force is so quick, and that the system allows for an officer to say, oh, this person was resisting arrest, so I beat him up badly. Well, that isn't how it is everywhere. And I think that's really the other important thing that I would say, is that we do have other models. We have other types of policing, and not to say that there's some perfect, you know, model out there that we can look to, but we know that, you know, for example, in the UK, officers don't automatically get a firearm when they're going out on patrol. And there's lots of reasons for that, but it really helps put it into context that the way that we've accepted this is how policing is not how it has to be. And we have to be able to modify the police in our localities, our municipalities, and also the RCMP, which is very problematic as well, so that it fits Canadian society. And Canadian society is not American society. That's something that everybody knows, but somehow we've kind of accepted this Americanization of police, which also is, you know,
militarized more.
Militarized police, yeah. Exactly. And also where, you know, if somebody has an edged weapon and they're brandishing it, like that person is basically written off. That's not how it is in the UK. Somebody has an edged weapon, they come in with shields, and they basically slowly and very patiently bring in as many officers as they need to make sure that that person survives. Why do we accept then that that person gets shot? You know, look at the case of Sammy Yatim, which is in Ontario, obviously. And
Yeah.
oh my God, so many, you know, horrible cases of police breaking into apartments, like the case in Mississauga that was just in 2020, as we, you know, the film was coming out on CBC, the TV version. Officers go in guns blazing into an apartment when they've been told by the family that the person inside is elderly, doesn't understand English, and will be terrified of them. What was the need for that? You know, and it's like we have to stop saying these are acceptable behaviors for police. And I hope our film helps achieve that consensus, or at least that the majority of Canadians would not want police officers to behave this way. And I don't think this is a very right or left kind of issue. I think this is common sense. I don't think it's cost effective. I don't think it's humane. And I don't think it makes any sense for our police to continue to be what it is right now. And I think that's what I would like Canadians to take away from this, is that we have to push at the power structures, whether that's attending the police commission meetings in your town and making sure that, you know, you're responsible and you're part of the people who are holding the feet of the chief and the other powers to be to the fire to make sure that this doesn't continue happening, or whether it's engaging online or these are things that people have to decide for themselves, but I just hope that it starts with awareness and also that there's a better way and it doesn't have to be like this.
For sure. I just want to read some feedback from the audience here. So Autumn is saying, as someone working in the justice system myself, thank you for this unflinching, realistic look at what goes on behind the scenes. It's crucial to shed light on the inequalities in the system that the general public don't get to see. And then I got another comment from Tracy. She says, after viewing the film, seeing its title, No Visible Trauma, come across the screen is quite jarring. Can you speak to the decision-making process in the title of the film?
Sure. Yeah, I think you know, titles are tricky for many reasons. I think you know, just by way of context, you know, like the CBC iteration of this film was called Above the Law. Very on the nose. It's sort of, I think, like functions in that realm. I mean, no visible trauma to us is sort of a broader kind of metaphor, but it is grounded in Godfred's story. So let's remember, basically, you know, he had been both, there was visible trauma clearly and had been noted in the reports, you know, from the first interaction with the officers where he had cut his lip, and then in the second one, we see in the photos, I mean, he is quite, you know, severely beaten, and that had been noted, you know, by EMS on site. But then when he gets to the lockup and there's like a secondary sort of medical report, that person writes down, you know, no visible trauma. And I think for us, it sort of speaks to the fact that, like, how much power there is in these different moments, you know, that sort of with the stroke of a pen, you know, that second individual kind of made, you know, those injuries, et cetera, kind of go away in some respect, or at least I don't know how else to kind of, you know, interpret that choice. I don't know how in the space of a few minutes he could have gone from having visible trauma to no visible trauma. That's a bit hard to believe.
And all of the clear mental and spiritual damage that has been done to this man and those who love him, and you can see that in the families that you interviewed, right? Like, that is trauma as well, and that's not really discussed, right? People almost want you to sort of just get over it and move on, and it was just one bad guy, and that really comes through in the film.
Well, and I think that's it. And, you know, we've had a number of sort of comments and feedback on, you know, on the title. And I think, you know, one sort of sentiment is like part of, I think, the problem, and, you know, Robinder had mentioned this, you know, is in Canada, we've really have had this very bad habit in a number of respects of being like, oh, well, again, this is an American problem, racism, brutality, all these issues. I think in the current context, that's no longer being accepted by a lot of people in our society. I think that's a good thing. But I think that partly why things are so severe is because we've not been confronting these issues for far too long. We've, you know, had this under the rug kind of sweep it under the rug attitude in which, you know, the trauma has not been visible, so to speak, you know, because it's been, you know, ignored or covered up or deflected or just not addressed. And, you know, and when you are, you know, you had mentioned earlier, you know, to do with the different sorts of individuals that are in the film. I think a lot of the time, you know, it's very, you know, oftentimes it's marginalized folks of different sorts, be it race, be it addictions, be it housing, be it whatever, you know, who are having really negative interactions with the police. You know, here's the Heffernan family, which is, you know, a kind of like almost like a postcard, you know, middle class, you know, they're from
Mm-hmm.
Anchorage. These are former school teachers, you know, white family in Saskatchewan. You know, like I think that for a lot of folks, you know, and you see it in the comments on, you know, on the socials in terms of people responding. I think there is all of a sudden it's like, you know, there is people can identify if you're from that kind of world in a different way. And I do think there's a value. I think it's harder to write off, you know, oh, this is, you know, you get a lot of these comments. It's very disturbing. And people saying, well, if you're not breaking the law, you won't have a problem with the police, you know, or if you're not this, or, you know, if you're, you know, there's a lot of victim blaming essentially, and a lot of rationalizing very poor behavior. So, yeah, titles.
Always
They're a
tough.
funny thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess just to wrap it up, I really enjoyed speaking with you guys. I'm just curious what you're working on next. I'm sure this project has taken on a life of its own, and you will continue to be involved in this sphere. But is there any other films you guys are working on right now?
Yeah, we're currently producing a feature film about a kind of a renegade safe injection site in Vancouver, and we're hoping to have that finished up in the next several months here, and we're very excited about that project. It's the director is Colin Askey, who we worked with on a previous short film called Haven, and we'll be sort of, if people follow our socials, we'll be announcing there's kind of a special screening of that coming up in the next few weeks, I believe. So yeah, something to look for.
That's awesome. So another controversial hot button topic right now, and good for you guys for tackling these subjects. And I'm sure, you know, this is a film that people are going to have varying opinions on. And thank you for taking on the challenge and for speaking with our Wee Festival today.
Oh, absolutely. What a pleasure. Well, we'll hope to be back in the future with other films, and hopefully could, you know, visit lovely Milton in person. It would be an honor.
And I'll just add one last thing.
Some wine and canapes.
That would be great. Our socials are Above the Law Doc on Facebook and Instagram, and Lost Time Media on Twitter, just in case people missed that the first time.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much, and have a safe 2021.
Thanks very much.